In the heart of a human home, far from the dense jungles where his kind roam free, a tiny creature found love in the most unexpected place. This is Kano, a baby gorilla, orphaned before he ever had a chance to know the wild. And this is the story of how he was raised by humans, only to one day return to the world he was meant for. From the very beginning, Kano's world was not one of towering trees and echoing calls of his own kind. It was the world of humans, their touch, their voices, their warmth. He was fed by their hands, carried in their arms, and spoken to as if he were one of them. And for a time, he believed he was. He learned their ways, mimicked their actions, and found comfort in their presence. He reached for their hands, not knowing the strength he would one day possess. He played with their children, unaware that he was different. To Kano, this was home. This was all he knew. But the story of Kano is not just one of love. It is a story of identity, of struggle, and of destiny. Because no matter how much love he found among humans, a part of him, deep inside, was waiting for the call of the wild, a call he could not ignore forever. Kano's journey began with tragedy. Deep in the jungle, where the thick canopy barely let the sunlight through, his mother held him close, shielding him from the dangers of the wild. But the real danger did not come from predators. It came from men. Poachers tore through the forest, their cruel intentions hidden behind the sound of rustling leaves and distant gunfire. And in an instant, Kano's world was shattered. His mother, his protector, was gone. Alone, frightened, and too young to survive on his own, he clung to the last scent of her, his tiny hands gripping the lifeless body that could no longer hold him back. Hours passed before fate intervened. A group of conservationists, searching for survivors of the poacher's destruction, found him, weak, trembling, barely clinging to life. Among them was the woman who would change his fate forever. She reached out, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with kindness. Kano, too small to understand, had no choice but to trust the warmth of her hands as she lifted him from the cold forest floor and carried him into an unfamiliar world. From that moment on, Kano's life was no longer ruled by the laws of the wild. He was wrapped in blankets instead of his mother's arms, fed from bottles instead of foraging for food, and lulled to sleep by soft voices instead of the rustling trees. The woman who saved him became his protector, his family, his mother in a world that was not his own. She named him Kano, a name that would follow him through every stage of his journey. As the days turned to weeks, Kano grew, his small body becoming stronger under the care of his human guardians. He laughed, played, and explored this strange world of walls and soft floors, of voices that spoke but did not sound like the calls of his own kind. He reached for his caretaker's hand the way he once reached for his mother, believing in his innocent heart that this was where he belonged. But deep inside, beneath the love and comfort, something unspoken lingered, a part of him that had not yet awakened, a part of him that, one day, would long for the home he had lost. Kano was no longer a helpless infant. The tiny, fragile creature that once clung to human hands had grown into a powerful young gorilla. His arms, once small enough to wrap around a single finger, now carried the strength of the wild he had never truly known. His playful nature remained, but something had changed. He was different now, too big, too strong, too wild for the human world, yet still too human for the wild. The signs were impossible to ignore. The way he moved, the way he looked at the world beyond the walls that confined him. He no longer fit in the space he had once called home. What was once adorable, the way he clung to his caretaker, the way he mimicked human gestures, was now a reminder of a deeper problem. Kano was not meant to live among humans, but could he survive without them? His caretaker watched him closely, torn between love and the painful truth. Kano had never climbed the towering trees of the jungle, never followed a troop through the dense undergrowth. He had never learned the language of his kind, the grunts, the chest beats, the silent stares that spoke of dominance and belonging. If he were to return to the wild, he would have to start from nothing. The decision was heartbreaking, but inevitable. He could not stay. Keeping him here would be selfish, would be cruel, would be denying him the life he was meant to have. But letting him go? That meant sending him into a world he had never known, hoping, praying, that something deep inside him would remember. The day came sooner than Kano understood. He saw the sadness in his caretaker's eyes, heard the gentle words she whispered, felt the hesitation in the way she touched him one last time. But he did not know this was goodbye. He did not know that the world he had always known was about to change forever. As the doors of the transport crate shut around him, the walls he had grown up within were replaced by something vast, something unfamiliar. The smell of earth, of trees, of something ancient filled his senses, and for the first time in his life, Kano was on his way home, to a place he had never been. The world outside was nothing like the one Kano had known. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fresh leaves, the sounds of rustling branches and distant calls echoing all around him. No soft floors, no walls, no familiar human voices, just endless green stretching in every direction, wild and untamed. He gripped the bars of his transport crate, his dark eyes scanning the unfamiliar world before him. This was the jungle. This was home. But it didn't feel like it. When the doors opened, there was no hesitation. His caretaker stepped back, giving him space, letting him decide. For a moment, Kano did not move. He only stared, unsure, as if the world before him was something he had only seen in dreams. Then, with slow, careful steps, he took his first steps onto the forest floor. The dirt felt strange beneath his hands, the branches above casting shadows that danced and flickered like something alive. Every sound, every movement was new. He was not alone. The other gorillas were there, watching. A troop, a family, but not his. He didn't understand their body language, their stares, their grunts. When he tried to approach, they moved away. He was too much like them to be ignored, but too different to be accepted. When he reached out, they did not respond. When he followed, they turned their backs. He had spent his life among humans, and now, among his own kind, he was a stranger. The days passed, and Kano struggled. He did not know how to find the right food, did not know when to stand his ground and when to submit. He was met with rejection again and again. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he sat alone, watching the others from a distance. He saw the way they moved together, the way they touched, the way they belonged. And for the first time, he felt something unfamiliar, something deeper than loneliness. He felt lost, desperate, confused. He did the only thing that made sense. He turned back toward the humans, toward the ones who had raised him, fed him, loved him. He moved toward the edge of the sanctuary, where he had last seen them, expecting open arms, familiar voices, safety. But this time, they did not come for him. They did not call his name, did not step forward to bring him back. They stood still, watching, waiting. They knew something that he did not yet understand. This was not his world anymore, and for the first time, Kano realized there was no going back. Kano had never felt truly alone until now. The humans who raised him had turned away, not out of cruelty, but out of love. And the gorillas he longed to join still saw him as an outsider. He was caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. But the jungle was patient, and time had a way of teaching even the most reluctant students. Hunger forced him to adapt. At first, he searched for food the way he had seen the others do, clumsily pulling at leaves, inspecting fruits he did not recognize. He watched, he mimicked, he failed, but failure led to learning. He discovered which plants were safe, which ones held water, which berries left a bitter taste on his tongue. The instincts buried deep within him began to surface. But food was not enough. The jungle was alive with unspoken rules, and Kano did not yet know his place. He was too wary to challenge, too inexperienced to submit. He moved on the edges of the troop, watching but never joining. Until one day, something changed. A young female, smaller than the others but confident, approached him. Unlike the others, she did not turn away. She studied him, curious but cautious, tilting her head as if trying to understand. When he did nothing, she reached out. Just a touch, brief but powerful. It was the first time one of his own kind had acknowledged him, and in that moment, something shifted. She showed him what words never could. She led him to food he had overlooked, demonstrated how to crack open tough shells, taught him the language of glances and gestures that spoke more than any human words ever had. Kano was learning, slowly, painfully, but surely. As the days turned to weeks, his presence among the troop was no longer questioned. He was no longer the stranger, the outsider. He was growing stronger, his movements more confident, his place among them becoming clearer. He was still different. His connection to humans had not faded, but the wild was no longer rejecting him. It was waiting for him to claim it. Kano had come far, but the jungle had one final test for him. No gorilla could truly belong without proving their place, and in every troop there was a leader, the silverback. He was massive, his presence commanding respect without a single word. Kano had kept his distance, avoiding direct confrontation, but today was different. Today, there would be no avoiding it. It started with a glance, brief but deliberate. The silverback watched him, assessing, measuring. Then came the approach, slow and heavy, the weight of dominance in every step. The others grew quiet, watching, waiting. Kano knew what this meant. He had seen the others submit, lowering their heads, making themselves small. But he had spent his life among humans, where eye contact was connection, where looking away meant weakness. He did not yet know the language of the wild. The silverback stood before him now, towering, muscles tense. A low rumble echoed through his chest, a warning, a question. Kano's heart pounded. Every instinct told him to hold his ground, to stand tall like he had seen humans do. But this was not their world. This was not their way. The moment stretched long, heavy with unspoken meaning. Then Kano made his choice. Slowly, he lowered his gaze, his body shifting ever so slightly into submission. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. He was not here to challenge, he was here to belong. The silverback studied him for a moment longer, then, satisfied, turned away. It was over. There was no fight, no roar of dominance, just quiet acceptance. And with that, Kano was no longer an outsider. He was one of them. That night, for the first time, Kano did not sleep alone. He rested among the others, his body warmed by the presence of the troop. He had spent his whole life searching for where he belonged. And now, at last, he had found it. Time passed, and Kano was no longer the lost gorilla caught between two worlds. He moved with confidence through the jungle, his steps steady, his instincts sharper than ever before. He no longer hesitated when reaching for food, no longer struggled to understand the silent language of his kind. He was a part of the troop now, accepted, respected, one of them. But deep within him, the past still lingered. The voices of the humans who had raised him, the warmth of their hands, the comfort of their presence, it had not vanished. He still remembered. And one day, as he wandered near the edge of the reserve, he saw them again. His caretaker stood at a distance, just as she had on the day she let him go. She did not call out to him. She did not try to bring him back. She only watched, waiting. Kano took a step forward, his heart pulling him in two directions. For a moment, he was that small, helpless infant again, longing for the world he had once known. But then, something changed. He turned his head, looking back toward the jungle, toward the life he had fought to claim. He was no longer just the gorilla raised by humans. He was a creature of the wild now. The jungle was his home. The troop was his family. With a final glance, Kano stepped away. Not with sadness, not with regret, but with quiet understanding. He did not need to choose between the love he had known and the life he had now. Both would always be a part of him. But his journey was complete. He had found where he truly belonged. As he disappeared into the dense green, his caretaker smiled, tears in her eyes but pride in her heart. She had saved him once, but now, Kano had saved himself. He was no longer a creature caught between two worlds. He was wild. He was free.